to see that question in your eyes.
Iron Lung is already a cult film after only a week in cinemas. Thing is, it was a cult film before it was even released.
Beginning the descent. Cruising depth in roughly 2 minutes. Stand by.
That goes against the usual rules. You see, cult cinema used to be earned. Iron Lung, however, shows what happens when cult is guaranteed.
Why would there be flames?
You did test this thing, right?
This is the test.
The rules are changing.
Where's the reason for this quiet rapture? Too few to rebuild.
This is a different kind of cult altogether. Algorithmic loyalty. And that's the game changer, whether you like the film or not.
Tearing up even at the beginning of this?
This is the first film by its creative force, Mark Fishback, aka Markiplier, someone known only to a relatively niche audience, if you consider 40 million people niche. 40 million followers, how to make a guy feel inadequate. Anyway, as a result of that astonishing dedicated fan base, it had cleared a profit before it was even released. That's a largely unknown IP, a first-time on-screen lead driven entirely by a fan base that demanded access. To put that fan power in perspective, the film is a self-financed, theatrically released feature that went from a planned 60-screen run to over 4,000 screens worldwide. Not because distributors thought they'd found a sleeper hit, but because the fans pressurized the cinemas directly. And that is unprecedented. Cult films usually exist because something went wrong. They either didn't land at the time, didn't sell or necessarily fit in. They survived because a small number of people decided they were worth keeping alive. Iron Lung doesn't come from that place. It's not mainstream, but it's not exposed either. It never risks being ignored, and there's no chance that it will ever vanish. The audience is already there, already sympathetic and committed. That changes what cult means. This isn't a film that's been rescued after failure. It's a film that's been released to a welcoming audience. That's the key difference.
Yeah.
Which raises a question cult cinema has never had to answer before. What happens when a film never has to earn belief? The movie is based on an odd little indie horror game from 2022. Created by designer David Szymanski, it's a submarine in a blood ocean experiment that became something of a cult hit online by forcing dread through limitation of viewpoint rather than full-blown set pieces. The game sold well for an indie, around 275,000 copies, and that player base grew steadily as word of mouth spread. Crucially, Szymanski didn't just hand over the idea and walk away from the project. He worked with Fishback on the screenplay. He even had a cameo in the film and was involved throughout the production. So this isn't a loose adaptation. The original creator actually helped to shape what you watch on screen. And you have to love that. Now, the plot, which you will need to know going in. The film is set in the future, when humanity has spread out into space. Then, suddenly without warning, everything stops responding. An event known as the Quiet Rapture cuts off contact with all the colonies. Stars vanish and entire solar systems disappear, and what remains of civilization contracts inwards, becoming harsher and more procedural. Simon is a prisoner, also known as convict. Apparently once connected to an organisation called Eden, he's held responsible for the destruction of a space station. He denies the charge, but that's irrelevant. His guilt or innocence doesn't actually matter. He's just a convenient fall guy. Someone that they can assign to pilot the SM-13, a disposable submarine nicknamed the Iron Lung, and he's sent down into an ocean made entirely of blood. A sense of desperation sets in immediately into the film. There's a need to discover anything down below. We never quite know what that is, and Convict is just the latest volunteer that's lured into the vessel on the promise of being set free. The problem is the SM-13 was never designed to go this deep, so its systems degrade almost immediately. The temperature controls falter, the CO2 levels increase, and the oxygen becomes increasingly unstable. And the pipes drip. A lot. Often with blood. There are no windows. The only view of the outside world comes from a crude exterior camera that offers partial grainy black and white images. And as the descent continues, the isolation and physiological stress start to take their toll. Contact with the surface becomes intermittent, and Simon gets drip-fed just enough information and hope to keep him compliant.
But outside the hull, something starts moving.
Simon captures images of skeletal forms, and it becomes clear that he's not alone. From that point on, it's a battle for survival, against whatever lives in the depths outside, against the administrators on the surface, and it's also a battle for Simon to keep his sanity.
Formally, the film is very disciplined, has no choice. Aside from a handful of flashbacks, you remain fixed inside the submersible. You see the vessel from pretty much every angle. They built the submarine and mounted it on a giant gimbal, which has let them fully exploit the set. That also creates one of the film's problems. Because the world is so limited, the vessel itself has to be really interesting. And in order to be interesting, it has to be fairly large. New areas are revealed as the film progresses, almost like a video game. As a result, it never really feels claustrophobic in the way that other subaquatic films do, like The Abyss, for example. The X-ray screen is the film's best idea. It's a way of seeing that never really reassures you. Crucially, the film refuses to exploit it for cheap scares, and a lazier filmmaker, I'm sure, would have gone there. After the first 30 minutes of ramping up physical fragility, the film kind of parks the jeopardy, and you stop worrying about leaks, implosions, or hull breaches. Instead, it veers towards the metaphysical, which unfortunately can only sustain itself for so long. That's why the running time hurts. This is a 95-minute idea stretched to 125 minutes. It's too long, and it often feels like it. The filmmakers, however, trust the audience to stay with them regardless. And of course they do, because they were always going to. This is a commercial project, of course, but it never feels like a cynical cash grab. Fishback has directed, edited, written, starred in and bankrolled the film himself. To steal a William H. Macy joke when he was talking about Paul Thomas Anderson, he probably ground the lenses for the cameras as well. It's also composer Andra Hulshult's first film score, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting, building atmosphere and carrying momentum when the narrative slows down or pauses. So far, the film's taken a healthy amount of money, capitalising on a quiet release window. If that was deliberate, it was pretty bloody smart. I like Fishback. His performance is controlled. Considering how many actors go way too far on their first genre leads, especially in horror, his restraint is really impressive. He reminded me of a young Keanu Reeves. He's kind of effortlessly cool. He swears a lot, mind. Corporations will inevitably come sniffing around when they see how successful he is. I just hope he stays close to his roots. What Iron Lung shows more than anything is what happens when a film no longer has to win its audience over. A lot of older cult films became cult films because they were awkward to sit through. They were confusing and slow and potentially uneven, even actively sometimes hostile. You didn't latch onto them because they were welcoming. You latched onto them because they refused to behave properly. You earned your relationship with those films by sticking with them. Iron Lung was never going to be in that position. It never asks its audience whether or not they'll stay. It knows that they will. If you go into the film aligned with it, then that feels respectful. It's almost like an in-joke amongst friends. You sit back and you just let it wash over you. You know what to expect. However, if you're not in the gang, if you're not one of the cool kids, it plays differently. And see, nothing about the film changes. It's your relationship that does. Iron Lung wasn't on my radar at all, but my son and all his mates were all over it. He's the one that I convinced to let me go and see it with him at the cinema. I was the old fart hanging out with the cool kids. I'll be vaping and playing Minecraft next. But I liked the film. For some reason, it reminded me of Hardware, another low-budget science fiction film that became quietly cult. It sits in a very small category of genuinely good video game adaptations. Video games and cinema share an awful lot of DNA. AAA titles over the last few years have become bloated and risk-averse. The interesting work now is being done in the independent space. That's also where cult loyalty lies. I knew nothing about the game or the universe in which it was set before going in. And as a piece of narrative, it needs to let the uninitiated in just a little bit more. I admire that it doesn't over-explain, but a fraction more orientation would have helped someone, certainly someone as green as me anyway. But this is a ballsy move by Fishback. He's properly backed himself, and you can see the potential for a genuinely strong screen presence. Iron Lung is undoubtedly a cult film, but it's a new kind of cult film. It's a film that's been born in an environment of safety and certainty rather than doubt and friction. It's a film that's protected by a loyal following, rather than a film being tested by an indifferent audience. However, that should bring a new kind of cult offering. If you think you can't fail, you'll try anything.
This is not an expedition.
And that's where things could get really interesting.